we do a number of different voids projects with housing organisations, and we've done this for way over 10 years now. And part of the performance improvement we always put in place is what we call a voids tracker. And pre-pandemic, let's call it, and before people were more distributed in their workplaces, this was always a tracker on a wall or a board in an office, which works really, really well. And since COVID and since more distributed workforces have come into play, there's been a requirement for a virtual tracker. And we've tried several with varying degrees of success, often led by our clients, and some places have had spreadsheets and things like that. Yeukai is our implementation manager, and she's been working with a client, and she set up this tracker in MS Planner, which is definitely the best one we've had so far. It seems to fit the bill. I know you've got something similar in Grand Union, which is fantastic. So the reason for this session is basically to share the advancements we've had in approach, really. So I'm going to hand over to Yeukai.
So I will show you how to set up a quick tracker using MS Teams, and particularly Planner. So what you need before setting up your tracker is you will need your void requirements and your current void data. So once you have your Microsoft Teams open, initially your screen will blank like this. So there's no details on the front page. And as I mentioned, you'll need your requirements. So this is some information that you'd like to track in regards to your voids. This is information that you want to see on a daily, weekly basis. And it's the information that you use to encourage discussions during your day-to-day daily void tracker sessions, as well as reviewing your voids overall on a weekly or monthly basis. I will move over to the second screen now. For the purpose of the demo, I have created some data. I've used a requirement that I'm using for one of my clients. So these are the type of information they wanted to see around their void properties, what they wanted to track essentially. I will go through each and every single column, so what it means and what the requirement is, and I'll go through how we built this tracker in particular, how we incorporated some of the dates, important things like having labels and important information on the property as well. There will be some time at the end where you can ask questions, but as I go along the demo, if you have any questions, feel free to ask as I move across the screen. Can I just confirm that you can also see this clearly?
Yeah, I can see it.
All right, perfect. So one of the clients we're working with, we built the requirements on what they wanted to track on their void properties. So what we came up with was a sort of system where we can track the properties prior to them becoming void, and then during the termination process, as well as when they're actually physically void, going through to when they're let. So what we discussed was having an indication of when a property is due to become void. So this is before it physically becomes void. So what are the things that can happen in between that can possibly mean it's going to be void properties? We decided to call that column an inkling column. So this is one of an inkling that something might be a void, and we want to actually keep an eye on it, we want to keep a track on it. And what that does is it enables us to actually have a view of how many properties we expect to become void, the scope of works. It allows the teams in the lettings as well as the repairs team to look ahead and plan accordingly. After that, we want to actually track the property as it goes through the termination process. So we wanted to look at the property from the 4-3-2-1 weekly terminations. And then once you finish the final stage, we actually wanted to prioritize our property depending on the demand. So we came up with two columns. First column was the fast lane. So these are the properties that are in high demand. So these are the properties that we can easily let. There's a high demand to let them as quickly as possible. So we wanted to prioritize these once they're void to make sure the repairs team is working in a pull process and they're focusing on getting these properties back to us as quickly as possible. The slow lane is equally as important. It's still void properties, but there's a less of a demand for them. So it means that the repairs team are focusing on this column primarily, but they are still working along on these properties as well. They wanted to track any properties that might fall outside of the void process. So that means that they're temporarily on hold for various reasons. So that could be, it might not be a disposal properties, or there's some legalities happening in the background, or it might be actually, we're going to disinvest this area or this particular building, and we wanted to actually keep an eye on them separately from the 4-3-2-1. And we had a column that's called on hold. And then the final column that we discussed, I wanted to capture, was ready to let. So these are the properties that have gone through the repairs status, they've got all the works done, they're now ready to let, and we want to keep an eye on them. We don't want to completely remove them yet from the voids tracker. We want to see what's happening to them and also determine how quickly do we let them out. So I will go back to the beginning and I'll go for every single column, what it means, the requirements per column, and what you need to build it. So as I mentioned, the first thing that you need is your current voids data. So once you have all your voids data, you're going to separate it according to what properties are not void yet, what's going to fit in the inkling column. As you can see here, I've used some examples of what's in the inkling column. So I've got a few properties here and I'll explain the different types. So you can have possible evictions in the inkling column. So these are properties that are due to be empty very soon. And what you have here is a date. So if I click on this little tab here, it's just going to open the property. You'll see the basic property details. So you've got the quickly address here. You've got a label, which lets you know why that property might be a void property. So that's due to eviction. And you've got the due date here, which is the anticipated eviction date. So it means that after that date, it's void and it moves into the 4321 weekly. The only reason that date might change is if there's an extension, if there's a cancellation of eviction, and that means that it either might not necessarily be a voided property anymore, and by that case, it will come off the list completely, or there is an extension, you just extend the date or push it back and forward depending on the information that you have. I've done a few different types of examples in the inkling stage. So this property, all you have is really, you've got the address and you've got one label there and you've got a due date. A different property here, so you have as well as an inkling, you can have a transfer. So this one right here it's a possible transfer to a different property. Again, the due date is the date that you anticipate the transfer to happen. And in terms of the label here, you can actually preset your labels to what you want them to be. So creating a label is easy as just right clicking on the mouse, and you can see here, I've already temporarily created some different types of labels that I'm using to capture all the different types of things in the properties. So we've got preterm visits, so we've got eviction, and we've got another preterm visit in green, which means that it's happened. In red, it means that it hasn't happened yet. You've got a legal tag, so that's if any property is going for any legal proceedings. And then you've got abandonment, that can be another reason for inkling. You've got new builds, supported housing. So as many different labels as you'd like to see. And these are based on the requirements. So the information that you wanted to see on your void properties as they move along. And then what you have here, which was different to the other property, is you can actually add items or you can add information on the checklist. And what this does is on the front card of the property, it allows you to see what's happening to that property, any information, any status, any changes to it. So this is a transfer, and this lets me know that it's a possible transfer to 5 Curlew Way. So along the line somewhere here, I should be seeing maybe either 5 Curlew Way is either a void or pending to be void, or it's a mutual transfer. The next example that I will show you here on top of inkling that you could have is you could have new build as well, and as well as abandonment. And as I mentioned, you can utilize the checklist to add different information that you'd like to see on the property to indicate why it's an inkling and why it's going to be void, and anything else that you feel is relevant. Once the property becomes void, it now moves over from the inkling column and it moves into the 4321 weekly termination process. So here you've got a few different properties that are in those columns. And once they move into those columns, one of the requirements that we wanted to capture was property details. So we wanted to know if it's a flat or house. And in particular, this organization wanted to actually track what type of heating system they have. Gas central heating, is it storage heating or electrical heating? One of the rules that we had to go along with this process was to actually determine us to get as much information as we can on the property is we need to start having preterm visits, and we need to start visiting the properties prior to them becoming void. So as they move along the process, we can have as much information as possible, which allows the repairs team to anticipate the level of work required, which means they can plan better before it physically becomes void. So the label that you see here is a preterm in red. It means that, okay, it's hit the 4-week termination process, but preterm is yet to occur. And this is the minimum information that we have on the property. And this could be on the system that you have, and you have your data on there. So the moment we know this particular property is a 3-bed house, it's got adapted shower and it's got storage heaters, and there's a preterm visit yet to happen. What I'm expecting to see as it moves along is eventually that preterm visit should change and it should be green, which lets me know that somebody's been out there, they've scoped the works required, and I should see an extensive list of the work required, similar to this property in 3-week column. If I click on this, I'm just going to open that and explain the date to you. So the date here now is slightly changed from the inkling date. So the due date is the date that this property now actually physically became void. It's going to become void. So if we're looking ahead, it's going to become void on the 21st of June. It's going to be available, and they can actually get in there and start doing some work. So between then, there's somebody in the property. And if you do have a process internally where you can actually get in and start doing repairs work during the termination property, then that works as well. You can have a separate label for that to capture that if works are in progress or if works are pending during the termination process. But that date there will be the expected termination date. The only time that date will change if there's an extension on the termination date. So either it moves forward, and then it can either move completely back out from the 4-week process, or it can move back by a few days or a week or so, depending on how long you extend that for. As I move along here, I'm going to show you different properties that have different types of tags on them. So what you can do as well as just capturing information around repairs or preterm visits, you can capture information about the different types of schemes you have. So if you have multiple schemes within your properties, and you actually want to make sure you capture them and see which ones are priority or which ones you let easily, you can have those labels as well. So that particular organization had a supported housing scheme, and they wanted to keep an eye on this as they move along. They wanted to know how quickly are we advertising these properties, how quickly are we getting them on offer and somebody actually being signed up. To go with this 4321 weekly, we decided that with the supported housing schemes properties, we actually want to start advertising them as early as possible. We want to get the preterm visits in there, and we want to log any new builds as well that will either be part of a scheme or separately go into general needs housing as well. As I mentioned here, you would have brief information on the property, so that's capturing the type of house it is and the central heating. And once the preterm visits happened, you would have more information as it moves along as well. If I just move to the 321 column, similar to other columns, you have the different properties that have different labels on them, as I've explained. So if I click on this one, for example, so this one's at a preterm visit. So upon inspection, they've determined that this was major repairs. So you can actually highlight those properties so you can see them instantly and have an understanding which properties are most likely to cause a delay once they become void. And once that's happened, you come back here and you actually list a brief summary of the work that's required. So that's not too much detail, but it's just to explain, okay, why is there major repairs in the property? Well, there's major garden works and there's a survey required due to extensive wall cracks. So you can add additional lists on here that you feel is relevant, just to summarize the type of works that you anticipate to happen in the property. If you are going to allocate these works to contractors or various ones, you can actually come back in here and you can put that information as well, and just a brief summary of who's going out to the property once it becomes void and who's doing the works. I will move along to the fast lane and slow lane property. So once the property becomes void, it now moves into this lane. Once it moves into this lane, the date would change. So I'll click on this as an example. The start date would now be the date the actual property became void. So that's just to keep an eye on, okay, how long has property been void for? And the due date would be the anticipated return date. So this date is particularly for the repairs team. So once it hits the fast and slow lane, they're now starting works on these properties, whether it's a clean and clear, whether they have to get contractors in or any additional works that have to be done. They have to provide a due date, and that's when they expect the works to be completed. This allows the lettings team to have an idea when the property will be available. They can start advertising the property, and if they were to offer this property to someone, they have a date to go by and a date to work with. That day will only change if there's a delay in works that needs to happen, but that is captured during the day-to-day daily voice tracker session meetings. So you'd have a meeting, and should that date change for any reason, so that can either be it comes forward or it moves back, but that is captured during your conversations, as well as adding notes to this property tab, which you can do at the bottom. So if something changes and that date has to move by, I can easily add a note here to say subcontractor delay, move back by 2 days. I can save that information here, as well as discuss that during the day-to-day meetings, and that information is available for everyone to see. It's instant. Anyone that has access to these Teams planner will see that information straight away. What you have here is, depending on the type of labels you have, if there's major repairs required of the properties, as I mentioned, you need to actually put a brief summary of the information as to what works are required in the property. If there's anything else that changes as time goes by, you can either come on the property, simply click on it, add more labels, or remove labels. So for example, if this property was major repairs and we decided actually we're going to actually put this property on hold, or it's on offer, so it was advertised, somebody's accepted the property, it's on offer, I would simply add that label here and then remove the other one and just simply cross that. So changes to the labels on the different lanes can happen on a day-to-day basis. This is just updating the property details as of when the information becomes available. You have, depending on the structure that you have in your organization, you have the lettings teams working on these properties on a day-to-day basis. So the idea is they're getting the adverts out, they're talking to prospective tenants, they're trying to see if they can get viewings booked. Equally, the repairs team are speaking to contractors, arranging works, updating the dates on the system, updating any additional works that might come up that initially were not scoped for. And on a day-to-day basis, the requirement is you go in and you update that information, you add the relevant labels. I will show you where the dates as well are very useful on this tracker. So on here, you can see the date is highlighted in red. So if I click on that property, what that means is that the repairs team gave a due date of the 18th. So this property was supposed to have had the works completed by the 18th, but for whatever reason, the works are not done. So what the system does is when it identifies a past date, it's going to instantly go red. And that prompts the teams to actually start asking relevant questions. What's happened to the property? Why is it past due date? What's happened to it? And that can open up different kind of conversations. It could be there was a delay in works, as I mentioned before, or the date was changed, and it just means that somebody hasn't gone into that property and physically changed the date or updated the relevant information as well. If I move over to the slow column, so it's similar to the fast lane, it's got all the property details, all the information that you need, and it's got the same labels as well. As I mentioned, the main difference between those two properties is based on the demand of the property. So the voids team is still actively working on both columns, but it's just identifying that these properties are the high demand based on the lettings team's requirements, and we work on these primarily versus these properties here. The other additional final two columns that you can have on your tracker is you have the on hold column and the ready to let. So on hold column is initially these properties might have been in the fast lane or slow lane, but upon further inspection, or maybe when the works have started, you've now decided actually we're going to put that property on hold. It might have to be part of a disposal process. So you've now decided actually based on the cost of the works to go in and do the repair works or upgrade. This is costing too much. We actually might want to dispose of this property. So that comes out of the loop and that gets on hold. And what that does is it allows the team to actually know they can't advertise for that property yet. They can't do anything because it's on hold at the moment. It might potentially be disposed of. So there's two ways you can capture that information. So although it's in the hold column, you can either make a reference of it on here, so you've got possible disposal, or if you like, you can create a label on here and actually mention that it's disposals. So these are the pre-existing labels that I've already set up, but I'm going to create a disposal one just to show you how quickly and easy to do that. So you've got blank ones here, and it's just listing the different types of color. So I would like to actually make sure it's very easily noticeable that this property is a disposal versus it being on a list here. I'm just going to click on that tab, click on the square itself, and then just put disposal. And that instantly creates that label. And I've decided that I will delete that line here instead, delete that, and instantly you can see on here that's a disposal. That tag now is available for me to use on any other property that I create. If that property becomes a disposal, I'll easily just go into the right-hand column, click on it, and that tag will be available. I will show you how to create, add a property as well, and how you can move it amongst the different columns. So if you had a property that was initially in the slow lane, and as I mentioned, it's now going to be on hold for various reasons, there's two ways you can move that property across the screen. You can either drag it as that, or if you'd like, oh, didn't end that. Apologies, my browser's frozen on me. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can.
Yeah, I can hear you.
My screen froze there for a sec. Perfect. Okay, so you can drag the property as I mentioned, and you can see it's on here in the whole column. Or what you could do, alternatively, if I move that column back, you can just click on that little square, and it's going to ask you, what do you want to do? Do you want to assign a label to it? Do you want to assign an individual to it? Do you want to copy the task, or do you want to move the task over? So I would like to move it over, and it's just going to ask me what column would I like to move it onto, and I'm just going to click the on hold column and move, and that will move instantly as well. So that's pretty much how you can move the different properties along the columns. So this is the responsibility of the people within your voids team to actually move these properties along. So when you're doing your requirement session, one of the rules that you have in place is whose responsibility is it to actually update the property details, whose responsibility is it to move the properties in the lanes as they go by, and that's depending on the structure. So with the client that I'm working with, the lettings officers update the tags, and then move the property when it's in the 4321, but when it hits the high demand and low demand, it's the repairs team's responsibility to actually update the repairs information and move those properties along if they actually go from slow lane, fast lane, or to on hold as well. The final lane that we have here is the ready to let lane. So this was based on their requirements to keep an eye on the properties that have now had all the repairs works completed, and they actually want to keep an eye on them to see how long it takes to let them and what's happening with them overall. So what you have here is you have different types of properties, and I'll just show you the relevance of having them on your voids virtual voids tracker. So you've got a property here that's got two labels on it. So it's got offer accepted and sign up booked. So if I click on that, it still has the property information, and it's telling me that the sign up is booked for the 26th of May, and today is the 25th. So for the purpose of the demo, what I would do is if the sign up of this property happened and the viewing happened and we're happy with that, I can simply add a note onto here, and I'm going to put sign up completed. And to now remove that property from the virtual voids tracker, I will just click that little box at the top here. And what it does is it completes that property. And if I was to come out of it completely, you actually won't see that property on the column anymore. And what it's done is it's gone at the bottom here, and you can see show completed, and it's hidden the property completely. So that organization in particular wanted to keep an eye on the property they do let as well. So what they did not want to do was, once the property has been let and the sign up has happened, they didn't want to actually delete that off the grid at all. They want to just complete it and keep an eye on it. And at the same time, you can see the active ones here. If I just go back at the beginning here, just to show you. So as I mentioned, the inkling column is the properties that possibly will be void. So some of the things that we had around the voids tracker was having rules. So the rule is that you can't delete anything in the columns. So once you hit the 4328 column, you can't actually delete anything. It's only the inkling column that you can actually delete items. And reason being, you can delete them if they're no longer going to be void, because they are anticipated voids and anything can change in between. So if they're not going to be void anymore, they comes off the column and it gets deleted. Anything else in the column here, if dates happen, if dates change and moved about, you wouldn't actually delete the property and create a new one. You just change the date on the system and put your information on the notes as to what's happened and why that's either moved back or forward. And to actually add a property onto either the inkling column or the 4-week termination 321 is simply at the top of the column. You're going to see a little button here called add task. You would just click that right away and it comes up with a blank name, and you can put your property address. I'm just going to put 34 Pickett's Lane. And the due date is going to be the expected void date, and I'm going to say it's going to be the 20th. And what you can do as well is you can actually use a assign function. So the current client I'm working with actually uses that to assign the properties to the lettings officer based on their patchwork. So they all look after different patches, and one of the things I wanted to do was keep an eye on who's working on what patch, and so they know that if a property is being advertised or viewings, who's actually looking after that patch and who's going out there. So if you have all the individual members in this team's channel, you can add them and assign that to them. So I will assign it to myself. Once I do that, that saves the property. Just add task, and you can see right here at the bottom. Then you click onto that property, and and you can start adding your property details. So I will say that it's a 2-bed flat. It's got gas storage heaters. Oh. It has gas heating. Any other relevant information that you'd like to see on the property. So if I want to add a label, I'll just click on that label button and I can say a pre-term visit hasn't happened yet. And that is going to be a supported housing scheme. And that sits there in that column. That becomes part of our daily conversation. And that will move along as the weeks go by until it hits the fast lane and slow lane. And the idea is once it starts hitting the 2, 3, 1 column, there should be more information on that property. So by that point, there should be information on what level of repairs is required, if any, or if it's just clean and clear, because a pre-term visit would have happened as part of this process as well. So some of the functions I would like to show you of using the virtual voice tracker as well. So aside from using the dates in the other columns, the dates in these columns will equally go red, and this will actually let you know that this property was handed back from the repairs team on the 11th, and since the 11th it's been void. And you can use these dates to start conversations with the lettings team to say, okay, this property was ready on the 11th. If you have an offer accepted and a sign-up booked, I would be asking questions such as when is the sign-up booked for? And if someone tells me the 20th of May, maybe one of my questions might be, why was there a delay in getting a sign-up booked? Was there a resource issue? Was it just getting somebody actually to accept the offer on the property? So you can start using the dates in this column to actually determine why it's taking so long to actually let that property once it's ready. Equally as well, if you have new builds in here, ideally, new builds will come straight into the ready to let column, but the idea is before they were actually ready to let, you'd have been advertising those properties, you'd having viewings, you'd be communicating with prospective tenants to get, an offer on the table. So this column really just sort of shows you the level of properties that you have and what's happening around them. So I've put that on there as a blank one. As you can see, there's no labels on it. The only label in that's DTL. So DTL for that organization meant that it was difficult to let. And it was difficult to let due to location. So maybe that particular area, they find it hard to let 2-bed flats for every reason. So that difficult to let can have different meanings for organization. But what I can see here is a difficult to let property. There's no other tags on it. There is no offer accepted. There's no sign up booked. There isn't even a tag to say that it's been advertised. So my question would be, if you knew at the beginning of the process that was a difficult to let property, it should have been a high priority for you to focus on getting someone in that property, advertising it, do all you can. So having those labels can actually, again, as I mentioned, initiate the right kind of conversation with different teams to understand what's been happening with that property during the process as well. Some other functions of using the virtual voice tracker is the filtering system. So you can have this on your desktop and as well as the browser version. So I'm using the browser version for the demo, just so I can show you how to run a report on it. The desktop version, you can't run a report from there, you'd have to come to the browser. But if you had this on the browser and you actually wanted to filter it, let's say I was one of the lettings officers and I've got a few properties assigned to my patch in particular. I want to have this in the background as I'm working during day to day, and I want to filter this by my patches or my properties. I can do so. So you've got these tabs at the bottom. So you've got the board version, which allows you to view all the properties, and then you've got the charts version. So if I click on that, that will give you a summary of the different types of properties that you have and which columns they fit into as well. And then if I go at the bottom here, it's going to show you the members in the group. So if there are various members in the group, there will be a list of them all here and the different type of properties that are assigned to them. So there's two ways I can do it. I can click from here to see which properties are assigned to me. But if I was to move the cursor over, it will tell you roughly how many properties are late. And if I was to play around with the filtering system, it will tell me which columns they belong to as well. Equally, if I move along here, it will give me an idea of how many properties fall into which column and what they mean. So I would encourage you to sort of have a look at this filtering system and play around with it. It's a good idea to see overall status of the properties, how many properties are in progress, how many are late, how many are completed, and which columns they belong into as well. So if I go back to the board here, so if I was to click on this property as well, you can actually copy a task. As I mentioned before, it's a much easier way to create a new property if you wanted to. All you would do is just click that, and it would actually copy that exact information that you have on the property, and you can just change the name and change which column it belongs to, and you can actually click any labels or any attachments that you'd like to move along with it. So for example, on this one, if I wanted to have 6 properties in the same block, I didn't want to retype the same address over and over again, I would just click to copy that, and I would remove the checklist, but I would leave the attachments and labels, and then that will create that property straight away, and it's right here. And then I can go ahead and tweak that and add any additional information that I would like to add as well. If you wanted to run a report on this, you would click those 3 little dots at the bottom here, at the top, sorry, and you can just easily click export plan to Excel, and it will literally extract all the information that you have on here. It will have the labels, the tags, it will have the date the property was entered, the date the property became void. Any information that you've captured on this will physically move to the Excel spreadsheet, and then you can just filter and amend that as well. So, is there any questions so far? Sorry, I'm aware that that was quite a lot of information all at once.
At the end of the demo, Yeukai.
So, as I mentioned before, the amount of columns that you can have here will vary. It all depends on the requirements that you need as an organization. And you can export this plan. You can have as many people as you need in it. I would encourage you to have the relevant people that are actually physically working on these properties in this channel. They can go on a day-to-day basis and amend it. You can do it on your desktop, on your phone, on your tablet if you're out and about. As long as you've got internet browser, you can access it, so you can actually update the information as you go along. So one of the functions the current company is using is if they're actually out on inspections and they're the property, they quickly have the tracker on their device, and they'll just upload any information they have. And as I mentioned, it saves instantly. It saves them having to go back into the office the next day and actually wait to then come back and upload that information. They can do it right away as they're on the go and they're on the move as well. And the other thing that I was touching base on is just creating rules around the tracker. So you have rules that are clear, that everyone understands. You know, they can't delete columns. If there need to be any new labels added to this or any new columns they feel they need. So for example, if they wanted a separate column completely to actually capture new build properties, no one can just go in and create that column. That's something that's actually captured as part of the daily meeting and discussed with the team to say, okay, we feel that we need this new column, this is why it's relevant, or we need these new labels. That's discussed, that's agreed, and then that's actually added to part of the tracker as well.